The turning point arrived 3 weeks into Thunder's trial period, carried on the rhythmic thrum of helicopter blades cutting through the crisp October morning. Jake was mending fence posts near the north pasture when the sound reached him, a distant mechanical heartbeat that transformed his blood to ice water and sent his heart hammering against his ribs like a trapped bird. The post-hole digger slipped from Jake's trembling hands as the noise grew louder. His vision tunneled, the Wyoming landscape dissolving into desert sand and smoke. Suddenly, he wasn't 42-year-old Jake Patterson standing in his family's pasture. He was Staff Sergeant Patterson, crouched behind a Humvee in Kandahar Province, watching his world explode in fire and shrapnel. "Incoming!" he shouted to no one, dropping to his knees and covering his head with shaking hands. "Get down! Get down!" The medical helicopter, simply transporting a patient to Cheyenne Regional, passed overhead without pause, but Jake remained frozen in his private war zone, sweat streaming down his face despite the cool autumn air. His breathing came in ragged gasps, each inhale feeling like broken glass in his lungs. That's when Thunder found him. The massive German shepherd appeared as if materialized from thin air, his dark eyes focused with laser intensity on Jake's distress. Without hesitation, Thunder positioned himself against Jake's trembling form, his solid warmth and weight providing an anchor to the present moment. The dog's deep, steady breathing became a rhythm Jake could follow, pulling him back from the edge of complete psychological collapse. "Easy, soldier," Jake whispered unconsciously, his hand finding Thunder's thick coat. "Easy." Thunder remained perfectly still, his presence both protective and calming, until Jake's breathing normalized and the phantom sounds of war faded back into the recesses of his mind. Only then did the dog step back, his intelligent eyes conveying understanding that transcended species barriers. Sarah found them there 20 minutes later, Jake sitting cross-legged in the dirt with Thunder lying beside him like a guardian statue. She'd been searching for her husband after hearing his shouts from the house, her nursing instincts immediately recognizing the signs of a severe PTSD episode. "Jake?" she called softly, approaching with the careful movements she'd learned during his worst periods. "Honey, are you okay?" Jake looked up at his wife with eyes that seemed clearer than they'd been in months. He knew, Sarah. Somehow Thunder knew exactly what I needed. The revelation hung between them like morning mist, beautiful and fragile. For 3 years, Sarah had watched her husband fight invisible battles, had held him through nightmares and panic attacks, had learned to navigate the minefield of his trauma with careful steps and whispered reassurances. Nothing had provided the kind of immediate relief she'd just witnessed. "How?" she breathed, kneeling beside them both. Jake's hand continued stroking Thunder's coat, and Sarah noticed something she hadn't seen before. The dog's subtle response to specific touches, the way he positioned himself to maximum therapeutic effect, the professional precision of his calming technique. "He's been trained for this," Jake said slowly, pieces of a puzzle clicking into place in his damaged memory. "This isn't just protective instinct. This is medical response training." The implications rippled through Sarah's medical knowledge like stones in still water. Military dogs weren't just weapons and detection specialists. Many received specialized training for battlefield trauma response, psychological support, even medical alert capabilities. Thunder hadn't just comforted Jake randomly. He'd executed a textbook therapeutic intervention. That afternoon, while Grace was at school and Jake rested in the house, Sarah made a decision that would change everything. She placed a long-distance call to the Veterans Administration Medical Center in Denver, speaking with Dr. Elena Rodriguez, a specialist in canine-assisted therapy for PTSD patients. The behavior you're describing is consistent with psychiatric service dog training, Dr. Rodriguez explained after hearing Sarah's account. These animals are worth their weight in gold for trauma patients. If your husband truly has bonded with this dog, the therapeutic benefits could be life-changing. But the conversation took an ominous turn when Sarah described Thunder's military tags and apparent abandonment. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to be very clear about something. Military working dogs are federal property even after retirement. If this animal is supposed to be in government custody, there could be serious legal implications for your family. I strongly advise you to contact the Military Working Dog Program immediately." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone receiver. "What kind of legal implications?" "Federal charges, theft of government property. The military takes their canine assets very seriously." The conversation ended with Dr. Rodriguez's promise to research Thunder's background, but Sarah hung up with a growing sense of dread. She found Jake and Thunder in the barn, watching Grace practice her reading skills by reciting stories to the attentive dog. The scene was so peaceful, so healing, that the thought of government interference felt like sacrilege. "We might have a problem," Sarah told Jake quietly, explaining the call. Jake's expression hardened, the brief lightness from his breakthrough with Thunder disappearing behind familiar walls. "So they want him back?" "Of course they do. We don't know anything for certain yet. Dr. Rodriguez is going to research." "Sarah, I remember more now. Not everything, but pieces. There was a dog with my unit, a German Shepherd, who saved lives, including mine. What if Thunder is—" He couldn't finish the sentence, couldn't voice the possibility that the universe had somehow returned his military partner to him just as both of them needed healing most. The coincidence seemed too perfect, too much like the kind of miracle that didn't happen to broken soldiers and failing ranches. Grace looked up from her book, sensing the tension between her parents. "Is Thunder in trouble?" The question hung in the barn air, heavy with implications none of them were ready to face. Outside, storm clouds gathered on the horizon, and the first letter from the government would arrive with tomorrow's mail. The official government letter arrived on a Thursday morning, delivered by a federal courier who required Hal's signature and thumbprint before departing in a black sedan with tinted windows. The envelope bore the seal of the Department of Defense, and its weight seemed disproportionate to its size as Hal carried it to the kitchen table where the family had gathered for what had become their morning ritual of watching Grace feed Thunder his breakfast. "United States Government," Hal read aloud, his voice steady despite the tremor in his weathered hands. "Official notice of federal property recovery." Sarah felt her nursing training kick in as she watched Jake's face drain of color. His breathing quickened, and she moved closer, ready to intervene if another panic attack emerged. Grace continued scratching behind Thunder's ears, oblivious to the tension crackling through the room like electricity before a storm. The letter's contents hit like a physical blow. Thunder, identified by his military tattoo number K97742, was classified as missing federal property and subject to immediate recovery by authorized personnel. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from the Military Working Dog Research Division would arrive within 72 hours to collect the animal. Interference with federal property recovery carried penalties of up to 10 years in federal prison and fines reaching $250,000. "They can't just take him," Grace said quietly, her 8-year-old voice carrying a certainty that the adults envied. "Thunder chose us. We chose him. That's how families work." Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the wooden floor with a harsh screech that made Thunder's ears flatten against his head. "Families don't matter to the military, sweetheart. Everything belongs to them. Even the things that love you back." The bitterness in his voice cut through the kitchen like a blade, and Sarah watched her husband retreat behind the emotional walls that therapy had spent years trying to demolish. She'd seen this pattern before. Whenever Jake felt powerless, he became distant and cold, protecting himself by pushing away the people who mattered most. "There has to be something we can do," Sarah said, her mind racing through legal possibilities. "Military dogs retire, don't they? They get adopted by families?" Hal folded the letter with deliberate precision, his Korean War experience providing context that chilled him to the bone. "This isn't about retirement, daughter. This is about research. Says here Thunder's been classified as a valuable asset for ongoing psychological studies. They don't want him back for his pension." The implications hung heavy in the morning air. Grace might not understand the full scope of what research meant, but Jake's military background filled in the horrifying blanks. Laboratory conditions, invasive procedures, psychological testing that would break Thunder's spirit completely. The dog who had just begun to heal, who had learned to trust again, would be reduced to subject number K97742 in some sterile government facility. Over the following days, the family discovered the true weight of fighting the federal government. Sarah's calls to veterans advocacy groups hit walls of bureaucratic sympathy and legal limitations. Jake's former commanding officers offered moral support but admitted their hands were tied by regulations and chain of command. Even their local congressman's office provided nothing more than form letters acknowledging their concerns while emphasizing respect for national security protocols. Meanwhile, Grace had launched her own campaign of resistance. She began documenting Thunder's daily activities in a composition notebook decorated with horse stickers, creating detailed accounts of his gentle interactions with the ranch animals, his protective behavior around the family, and his remarkable ability to sense Jake's emotional state before episodes occurred. "Look, Mom," Grace said one evening, showing Sarah pages of careful 8-year-old handwriting. "Thunder helped Daddy 7 times this week. He stopped 2 panic attacks before they got bad, and he made Daddy smile when he was thinking about the soldiers who didn't come home." Sarah's heart clenched as she read her daughter's observations, written with the matter-of-fact clarity that children brought to emotional truths adults struggled to acknowledge. Grace had documented not just Thunder's actions but their effects. How Jake's nightmares decreased when Thunder slept near their bedroom door, how the dog's presence allowed Jake to work outside without constant anxiety, how the simple act of caring for Thunder had given Jake purpose beyond his own pain. The financial pressure remained relentless. Bank representatives called daily, their voices politely professional as they discussed foreclosure timelines and property seizure procedures. The 72-hour countdown to Thunder's removal coincided almost perfectly with the final deadline for their ranch payment, creating a perfect storm of loss that threatened to destroy everything the Patterson family had built across 4 generations. Hal found himself making midnight walks to the barn, where Thunder maintained his vigilant post beneath Grace's window. The old veteran would sit on a hay bale, sharing silent communion with the military dog who understood things that couldn't be spoken aloud. "You know what's coming, don't you, boy?" Hal whispered one night, his weathered hand stroking Thunder's thick coat. "You've been through this before. Humans making decisions about your life without asking what you want." Thunder's dark eyes reflected moonlight streaming through the barn windows, and Hal could swear he saw understanding there, resignation mixed with a determination to protect Grace until the very last moment. The breaking point came when Dr. Elizabeth Morrison called to arrange the pickup details. Her voice carried the crisp efficiency of someone accustomed to military protocol, but Sarah detected something else underneath, a weariness that suggested Dr. Morrison had made these calls many times before. "Mrs. Patterson, I want to assure you that K9 to 7742 will receive excellent care in our facility. Our research into canine PTSD treatment has the potential to help thousands of military working dogs." "His name is Thunder," Sarah said firmly, "and he's already helping someone." My husband is a veteran with severe PTSD, and Thunder has provided more therapeutic benefit in 6 weeks than 3 years of traditional treatment." A pause stretched across the phone line before Dr. Morrison responded. "I understand your attachment, Mrs. Patterson, but individual cases can't supersede the greater good. Our research could develop treatments that help hundreds of dogs like Thunder." "What if Thunder doesn't survive your research?" Sarah asked bluntly. "What if being separated from the family he's bonded with destroys his progress and kills him? What good does that serve?" Another pause, longer this time. "That's a risk we have to take." After the call ended, Sarah found Jake in the workshop, methodically cleaning his hunting rifle with the kind of obsessive precision that signaled dangerous thinking. Thunder lay nearby, his presence the only thing keeping Jake anchored to the present, instead of spiraling into the dark places where desperate soldiers made irreversible decisions. "Jake," Sarah said carefully, "whatever you're thinking, it won't help." "They can't have him, Sarah." Jake's voice was flat, emotionless, the tone that scared her most. "Thunder saved my life, and now he's saving Grace's happiness. I won't let them turn him into a lab rat. And what happens to Grace when her father goes to federal prison for 10 years? What happens to this family if you throw your life away for a symbolic gesture?" The argument that followed shook the ranch house with its intensity, years of suppressed frustration and fear erupting like a dam burst. Grace listened from the top of the stairs, tears streaming down her face as her parents' voices rose in anger and desperation. Through the window she could see Thunder pacing restlessly in the yard, the dog's distress mirroring the family's emotional chaos. Hal found Grace sitting on the front porch at midnight, still in her pajamas, with Thunder's massive head resting in her lap. The old man's heart broke at the sight of his granddaughter's tear-stained face, her small hands stroking Thunder's fur with the kind of gentle rhythm that spoke of deep comfort between souls. "Grandpa," she whispered, "if they take Thunder away, will he remember that we loved him?" The question hit Hal like artillery fire, direct and devastating. In all his years of war and hardship, he'd never faced a battle that felt more important or more hopeless than this one. His family was fracturing under multiple pressures, his grandson-in-law was edging toward dangerous decisions, and his great-granddaughter was about to learn the harsh lesson that love wasn't always enough to protect what mattered most. "I don't know, sweetheart," Hal admitted, his voice rough with suppressed emotion. "But I know that Thunder will never forget how much you love him. That kind of love doesn't disappear, even when families get separated." As if understanding the gravity of the moment, Thunder lifted his head and placed his massive paw gently on Grace's small hand, a gesture of comfort that spoke to bonds deeper than ownership or federal regulations. Somewhere in the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, carrying freight toward destinations unknown, and Hal couldn't shake the feeling that time was running out faster than any of them realized. Tomorrow would bring Dr. Morrison and her government team, and with them, the end of Thunder's brief taste of family life. Unless something changed, unless some miracle occurred, the Patterson family would lose both their home and their healing heart in the span of a single devastating week. Dr. Elizabeth Morrison arrived at Last Hope Ranch precisely at 0800 hours, her government sedan kicking up dust clouds that hung in the still morning air like smoke signals of impending doom. She emerged from the vehicle with military bearing, her graying hair pulled back in a regulation bun, her crisp uniform bearing the insignia of the Military Working Dog Research Division. 2 federal marshals flanked her, their presence transforming the pastoral ranch setting into something that felt more like a crime scene. Grace pressed her face against the kitchen window, watching the official procession approach their front door. Thunder stood beside her, his body tense with alertness, every instinct honed by years of military service telling him that these people represented danger to his new pack. The dog's low growl vibrated through the floorboards, a sound that made Sarah's nursing instincts spike with protective maternal fury. "Remember what we discussed," Hal told his family in a voice that carried 4 generations of Patterson determination. "We're polite, we're cooperative, but we don't make this easy for them." Jake stood in the corner of the kitchen, his hands shaking slightly as he gripped his coffee mug like a lifeline. The sight of Dr. Morrison's uniform had triggered a cascade of memories. Fragments of his time with a K-9 unit in Afghanistan, images of a German shepherd who had shared his foxhole during the worst firefights, pieces of a partnership that military doctors claimed was lost forever to traumatic brain injury. The knock on the front door came with official authority, 3 sharp raps that echoed through the house like gunshots. Hal opened it to reveal Dr. Morrison's professionally compassionate expression, the kind of face that had delivered difficult news to military families countless times. "Mr. Patterson, I'm Dr. Elizabeth Morrison from the Military Working Dog Research Division. I believe you received our correspondence regarding federal property K9-7742. His name is Thunder," Grace said firmly, appearing beside her great-grandfather with the fearless determination that only 8-year-olds possessed. "And he's not property. He's family." Dr. Morrison's expression softened slightly as she looked down at the small girl whose fierce green eyes burned with protective love. Something in the child's stance, the way she positioned herself between the officials and her beloved dog, reminded Morrison of her own daughter, lost to leukemia 15 years earlier. "I understand your attachment, sweetheart," Dr. Morrison said gently. "But Thunder is a very special dog who can help other soldiers feel better. Don't you want him to help as many people as possible?" "He already helps people," Grace replied without hesitation. "He helps my daddy every day." "Watch." As if summoned by cosmic timing, Jake's breathing suddenly became rapid and shallow, the familiar prelude to a panic attack triggered by the stress of the confrontation. Thunder immediately moved to Jake's side, pressing his solid weight against his legs while maintaining calm, steady eye contact. The dog's presence worked like medicine, Jake's breathing gradually slowing as he focused on Thunder's unwavering support. Dr. Morrison watched the interaction with professional interest, taking notes on a military clipboard. "Impressive," she admitted, "but our research facility can study these behaviors systematically, developing protocols that could help thousands of veterans." "What happens to Thunder during this research?" Sarah asked, her nursing background making her suspicious of vague promises about animal welfare. "He'll be comfortable," Dr. Morrison replied, but something in her tone suggested rehearsed talking points rather than personal conviction. "Our facility meets all federal standards for animal care." "That's not what I asked," Sarah pressed. "What exactly will you do to him?" The marshals shifted impatiently, their body language suggesting this conversation was taking longer than scheduled. Dr. Morrison glanced at her watch, then back at the family whose obvious love for the dog was complicating what should have been a routine property recovery. "Psychological stress testing," she admitted reluctantly, "controlled trauma exposure to measure therapeutic response patterns, brain imaging studies, behavioral modification protocols. It's all necessary for developing standardized treatment approaches." Jake's face went white as the implications hit him. "You're going to torture him. You're going to break him down systematically to see how he responds to trauma." "We prefer the term controlled scientific observation," Dr. Morrison said defensively. The potential benefits are standing right here," Hal interrupted, his voice carrying the authority of a man who'd faced down enemies, foreign and domestic. "Thunder isn't broken. He's not a research subject. He's a living being who's found his purpose helping this family heal." Dr. Morrison's professional composure began to crack slightly. She'd conducted dozens of these recoveries over the past 5 years, but something about this situation felt different. Usually, the dogs were housed in temporary shelters or veterinary facilities, their human connections minimal and easily severed. But Thunder's integration into the Patterson family was complete and profound, his therapeutic value undeniable even to her clinically trained eye. "Dr. Morrison," Sarah said carefully, "may I ask if you have children?" The question hit like a physical blow, and for a moment the official mask slipped entirely. "I had a daughter," Dr. Morrison said quietly. "She passed away when she was 9. "Then you understand what it feels like to lose someone you love," Grace said with 8-year-old directness. "Thunder loves us, and we love him. Taking him away will hurt all of us, including Thunder. How does that help anybody?" The silence stretched uncomfortably as Dr. Morrison struggled with emotions she'd buried beneath years of military protocol. One of the marshals cleared his throat impatiently, reminding everyone that schedules needed to be maintained and federal property needed to be recovered. "I have my orders," Dr. Morrison said finally, her voice lacking its earlier conviction. "Thunder needs to come with us today." Jake stepped forward, his jaw set with dangerous determination. "Over my dead body." "Jake, no," Sarah warned, recognizing the warning signs of her husband's most destructive impulses. "Mr. Patterson," one of the marshals said coldly, "interference with federal property recovery is a felony." "Step aside." The confrontation balanced on a knife's edge, testosterone and desperation creating a volatile mixture that could explode into violence at any moment. Thunder seemed to sense the danger, positioning himself protectively in front of Grace while keeping his eyes on Jake, ready to provide support if his new pack leader's psychological stability cracked under pressure. That's when Hal made a decision that surprised everyone, including himself. The 72-year-old veteran reached into his shirt pocket and pulled out a folded document that looked official and important. "Before you take Thunder," Hal said calmly, "you might want to see this." Dr. Morrison accepted the paper with professional skepticism, but her expression changed as she read. The document was a military service record, specifically Thunder's complete deployment history and medical records. According to the paperwork, K97742 had been officially retired due to severe PTSD and declared unsuitable for continued military service 18 months earlier. "Where did you get this?" Dr. Morrison demanded. "I made some calls," Hal said simply. "Turns out when you've been around as long as I have, you know people in interesting places. Thunder was supposed to be placed in civilian adoption through the proper channels. The fact that he ended up abandoned on a highway suggests someone in your department made a mistake." The implications rippled through the official group like shockwaves. If Thunder had been properly retired and cleared for civilian adoption, then his current status wasn't theft of federal property. It was a successful rescue and placement. "This doesn't change anything," one of the marshals said uncertainly, but his voice lacked conviction. "Actually, it changes everything, Doctor," Morrison said slowly, her scientific mind processing the legal ramifications. "If these records are authentic, then Thunder's status as federal property was terminated 18 months ago. Our recovery order may be based on outdated information." Grace looked up at her great-grandfather with new respect, understanding that Hal had just pulled off something miraculous. "Does this mean Thunder can stay?" Dr. Morrison studied the paperwork again, her expression cycling through professional frustration and something that might have been relief. "I'll need to verify these records with my superiors. Until then, Thunder remains with your family." As the government vehicles departed in clouds of dust, the Patterson family stood on their front porch in stunned silence. Thunder sat beside Grace, his tail wagging slowly as if he understood that his immediate future had just become significantly brighter. "Grandpa," Grace said wonderingly. "How did you get those papers?" Hal's weathered face cracked into the first genuine smile anyone had seen from him in weeks. "Sometimes, sweetheart, the truth is the best weapon you can have. And sometimes you just need to know which doors to knock on to find it." But even as relief flooded through the family, they knew this victory might be temporary. Dr. Morrison would verify the records, and if any discrepancies were found, Thunder's reprieve would end quickly. For now, though, they had time. Time to figure out their next move, time to strengthen the bonds that made Thunder more than just a dog, and time to prove that some connections transcended ownership, regulations, and government bureaucracy. The euphoria of Dr. Morrison's departure lasted exactly 18 hours. Sarah was preparing for her night shift at the hospital when her phone rang with the cold efficiency that could only mean government business. Dr. Morrison's voice carried none of the previous day's uncertainty, replaced instead by the hard edge of someone who'd received new orders from superiors who didn't appreciate complications. "Mrs. Patterson, I've completed verification of those military records your father-in-law provided. There are significant discrepancies in the documentation that suggest fraudulent alteration of official military documents. Federal marshals will arrive at your property at 0600 hours tomorrow morning with a warrant for Thunder's immediate seizure and possible charges for document fraud." Sarah's hand tightened on the phone as her nursing instincts kicked in, automatically checking Jake's location and mental state. He was in the barn with Grace and Thunder, their evening routine of reading stories to the dog having become a sacred ritual. "Dr. Morrison, please listen to me. That dog is providing documented therapeutic benefit to a severely traumatized veteran. Separating them could trigger a complete psychological breakdown. Mrs. Patterson, I sympathize with your situation, but federal law is clear. Military working dogs are government property, regardless of their therapeutic value to individual families. Thunder will be transported to our facility tomorrow morning." The line went dead, leaving Sarah staring at the phone with mounting horror. She'd witnessed Jake's darkest moments, had talked him back from the edge during his worst episodes, and she knew with absolute certainty that losing Thunder would destroy whatever progress he'd made. Worse, she suspected it might push him toward the kind of desperate actions that would tear their family apart permanently. In the barn, Grace sat cross-legged on a hay bale reading aloud from Charlotte's Web, while Thunder listened with the patient attention of someone who understood that these moments were precious. Jake watched from the doorway, his face peaceful in a way Sarah rarely saw anymore. The sight of her husband's calm expression made the phone call's implications even more devastating. "How's the reading going?" Sarah asked, forcing normalcy into her voice. "Thunder loves this book," Grace announced seriously. "I think he identifies with Charlotte because they're both protectors who sacrifice for their friends." The innocence of the observation hit Sarah like a physical blow. Grace had unknowingly chosen a story about loyalty, sacrifice, and the devastating reality that sometimes love isn't enough to prevent loss. The parallel to their situation was so perfect, it felt like cosmic cruelty. Jake sensed his wife's distress immediately. "What's wrong?" Sarah's resolve to break the news gently crumbled under the weight of immediate honesty. "They're coming back tomorrow morning. Dr. Morrison verified the records, found discrepancies. They're calling it document fraud." The transformation in Jake was immediate and terrifying. His face went from peaceful to savage in seconds, his hands clenching into fists as his breathing accelerated. Thunder responded instantly, moving to Jake's side and pressing against his legs, but for the first time since their bond had formed, the dog's presence wasn't enough to stop the psychological avalanche. "They want to take him for research," Jake said, his voice flat with dangerous calm. "They want to torture him to see how broken dogs respond to trauma. I won't let that happen." "Jake, we'll find another way." "There is no other way." The explosion of rage echoed through the barn, startling the horses and sending Grace scrambling backward. The government takes everything that matters and destroys it. They took my friends, my sanity, and now they want to take the one thing that makes me feel human again. Thunder began whining, his canine instincts recognizing that his pack leader was approaching a psychological breaking point. The dog tried positioning himself between Jake and the family, his training warring with his love as he struggled to provide comfort while maintaining protective vigilance. Grace started crying, her 8-year-old emotional reserves overwhelmed by the adult fury and desperation surrounding her. "Daddy, you're scaring me." The words hit Jake like cold water, temporarily pulling him back from the edge. He knelt beside his daughter, his hands still shaking as he pulled her into a fierce hug. "I'm sorry, sweetheart. Daddy's just scared too." That night, the family held an emergency meeting in the kitchen while Thunder maintained his vigilant post beneath Grace's bedroom window. Hal spread his Korean War service records across the table, his weathered hands shaking slightly as he admitted the truth about the documents he'd provided. "The records were real," he said quietly, "but they weren't Thunder's. I switched the serial numbers, used information from another dog who'd died in service. I thought if I could buy us time, maybe we could find a real solution." Sarah felt her world tilting sideways. "Hal, that's federal document fraud. They could send you to prison." "I'm 72 years old, daughter. What are they going to do? Give me 25 to life?" "But Jake, he's got decades ahead of him. If they take Thunder, if he does something desperate to stop them, Grace loses her father, and you lose your husband." The weight of multiple disasters pressed down on them like a physical force. The ranch foreclosure loomed in 36 hours. Federal marshals would arrive in 12 hours to seize Thunder, and Jake's mental state was deteriorating by the minute. Sarah found herself calculating survival scenarios like a battlefield triage nurse, trying to determine which losses they could survive and which would destroy them completely. "There has to be something," she whispered, more to herself than the others. "Some legal precedent, some regulation we can use." Jake stood abruptly, his chair scraping against the floor with ominous finality. "I'm not letting them take him. Period." "Jake, what are you thinking?" Sarah's medical training allowed her to recognize the warning signs of someone making irreversible decisions. "I'm thinking Thunder and I disappear tonight. Head into the mountains, live off the land. They can't take what they can't find." The plan was desperate, illogical, and born from trauma rather than rational thought. But Sarah could see in her husband's eyes that he meant every word. Jake was prepared to throw away his family, his future, and his freedom rather than watch Thunder suffer in a government laboratory. "And what about Grace?" Sarah asked quietly. "What about us?" "You'll be better off without me," Jake said, his voice carrying the hollow certainty of someone who'd convinced himself that self-destruction was heroism. "At least this way, Thunder gets to stay free." Grace appeared in the kitchen doorway, her small face pale with exhaustion and fear. She'd been listening from the stairs, understanding more than any 8-year-old should about adult desperation and impossible choices. "Daddy, if you leave with Thunder, who's going to help you when you get scared? Who's going to help Thunder when he gets sad? You need each other, but you both need us, too." The simple wisdom of childhood cut through Jake's trauma-fueled planning like sunlight through storm clouds. He stared at his daughter, seeing clearly for the first time in hours that his desperate escape plan would abandon the very people Thunder had taught him to protect. Thunder appeared beside Grace, his intelligent eyes moving between family members as if assessing the emotional temperature of his pack. The dog's presence seemed to anchor everyone, reminding them that whatever happened, they needed to face it together. But time was running out, and morning would bring federal marshals who wouldn't be deterred by legal technicalities or emotional appeals. The Patterson family had less than 12 hours to find a miracle or lose everything that mattered most. The miracle arrived at 3:47 a.m. in the form of Sarah's cell phone buzzing with an unknown number from Denver. Dr. Morrison's voice carried exhaustion and something that sounded suspiciously like moral conflict as she spoke rapidly, as if afraid she might lose courage if she slowed down. "Mrs. Patterson, I need to speak with your family immediately. There's been a development that changes everything about Thunder's case." Sarah wrapped her robe tighter against the pre-dawn chill as she woke the household. Within minutes, the Patterson family had gathered in the kitchen, their faces drawn with fatigue and desperate hope. Thunder positioned himself near Grace, his alert posture suggesting he sensed the importance of this conversation even without understanding the words. "Dr. Morrison, it's nearly 4 in the morning, Hal said, his voice carrying the gravelly authority of someone accustomed to crisis communications. "What's so urgent it couldn't wait for daylight?" "Because by daylight it might be too late," Dr. Morrison replied, her professional composure cracking with each word. "I've been conducting an investigation into Thunder's case, and what I've discovered makes me sick to my stomach. The Military Working Dog Research Division has been systematically misclassifying retired canines as active federal property to acquire subjects for experimental protocols that violate every ethical standard I've ever believed in." The silence that followed her revelation was profound, filled with the weight of systematic betrayal. Jake's hands began trembling again, but this time with rage rather than fear. Sarah reached for him automatically, her nursing instincts recognizing the signs of someone approaching a dangerous psychological threshold. "Thunder was legally retired 18 months ago," Dr. Morrison continued, her voice gaining strength as she spoke truth to power. "His military service record shows severe PTSD that made him unsuitable for continued duty. He should have been placed through the official adoption program, but someone in my department falsified his status to make him available for research. Your father-in-law was right. Thunder belongs with your family." Grace looked up at Hal with newfound respect. "Grandpa, you weren't lying about the papers?" "I was wrong about them being fake," Hal admitted, his weathered face creasing into a grim smile. "But I was right about the truth being our best weapon. Sometimes you just have to dig deeper to find it." Dr. Morrison's next words carried the weight of personal confession. "Mrs. Patterson, when you asked me yesterday if I had children, it broke something open inside me that I've kept locked away for 15 years. My daughter Emma died of leukemia when she was 9. During her final months, the only thing that brought her comfort was a therapy dog named Max. When Emma passed, I threw myself into military research, convinced that science could solve everything that love couldn't fix." The phone line carried the sound of Dr. Morrison's ragged breathing as she struggled with emotions she'd buried beneath decades of professional detachment. "Watching Thunder with your family yesterday, seeing the genuine healing happening in your home, I realized I've been so focused on helping thousands of hypothetical dogs that I've forgotten the individual animals who are suffering right now." Jake found his voice, though it came out rough with suppressed emotion. "What are you saying, Dr. Morrison?" "I'm saying that Thunder's case has exposed systematic corruption within my department. I've gathered evidence of dozens of dogs who were illegally retained for research when they should have been retired to civilian families. I'm prepared to testify before a congressional committee, but I need Thunder to remain with your family as evidence of successful K9 civilian integration." Sarah felt her knees go weak with relief, but her medical training kept her focused on practical concerns. "What about the federal marshals coming this morning?" "I've contacted my superior's superior, a General Catherine Walsh, who serves on the Senate Armed Services Committee. She's ordered an immediate halt to all canine recovery operations pending a full investigation into department practices. The marshals have been recalled." The kitchen erupted in cautious celebration, but Dr. Morrison's voice cut through their relief with continued urgency. "There's more. The investigation revealed that someone in our department has been tracking canine adoptions and deliberately sabotaging successful placements to reclaim dogs for research. Thunder wasn't abandoned randomly. He was specifically taken from his original adoptive family and dumped near your ranch." "Why our ranch?" Hal asked, his tactical mind processing the implications of targeted placement. "Because someone knew about Jake's military background and PTSD," Dr. Morrison explained. "They wanted to observe whether a traumatized veteran and a traumatized dog would bond naturally, creating a controlled experiment without the family's knowledge. You've been unknowing participants in an unethical study." Jake's face went white with fury. "They used us. They used Thunder. They turned our healing into their research project." "Yes, but in doing so, they created the evidence needed to expose the entire operation," Dr. Morrison said. "Thunder's recovery with your family proves that canines can successfully integrate into civilian life when placed with appropriate families. Your case will be the cornerstone of new legislation protecting retired military dogs." Grace had been listening with the serious concentration that children brought to adult conversations they sensed were life-changing. "Dr. Morrison, does this mean Thunder gets to stay with us forever?" The question hung in the pre-dawn air like a prayer, and Dr. Morrison's answer carried the weight of official promise. "It means Thunder is legally yours, Grace. No one can ever take him away from your family again." But the revelations weren't finished. Dr. Morrison's voice took on a different quality, personal rather than professional. "There's something else you need to know. The person responsible for orchestrating Thunder's illegal retention and placement is Dr. Victoria Blackwood." Sarah's blood ran cold. "Our neighbor? The one who offered to dispose of Thunder when he first arrived?" "The same. Dr. Blackwood has been conducting unauthorized behavioral studies using illegally retained military dogs. She's been watching your family's interactions with Thunder, documenting his therapeutic progress, and planning to publish research papers using your data without consent. Her property borders yours specifically because she wanted proximity to observe her subjects." The implications hit like physical blows. Their wealthy neighbor, who had seemed concerned about Thunder's aggressive behavior, had actually been the puppet master orchestrating their trauma for scientific gain. Every conversation, every offer of help, every expression of concern had been calculated manipulation designed to generate research data. Jake stood abruptly, his chair falling backward as military training warred with civilian restraint. "She's been watching my family. Studying my PTSD, my daughter's interactions with Thunder, turning our private moments into her research project." "Jake, no," Sarah warned, recognizing the dangerous shift in her husband's demeanor. "We handle this legally, not militarily." "Your wife is right," Dr. Morrison said firmly. "Dr. Blackwood is facing federal charges for multiple violations of research ethics, fraud, and animal cruelty. The FBI will arrest her within hours. Your family's testimony will ensure she never conducts research again." Hal's weathered hands gripped the kitchen table as the full scope of the conspiracy became clear. "How many other families have been used like this?" "At least 30 that we've identified so far," Dr. Morrison admitted. "Retired military dogs placed with veteran families under false pretenses, their recovery monitored and documented without consent. It's the largest research ethics violation in military history." Grace looked around at her family's shocked faces, her 8-year-old mind processing betrayal and vindication in equal measure. "Does this mean we helped catch bad people?" "Yes, sweetheart," Dr. Morrison said gently. "Your love for Thunder helped expose people who were hurting animals and families. Your heroes. Thunder, as if sensing that the crisis had passed, moved to each family member in turn, offering gentle comfort and reassurance. His calm presence reminded them that despite the revelation of systematic manipulation, their bonds were real, their healing was genuine, and their future was finally secure. "Dr. Morrison," Sarah said carefully, "why are you helping us? Why risk your career to expose your own department?" The answer came quietly, weighted with 15 years of grief and regret. "Because Emma would have wanted me to save the dogs, not sacrifice them for science." And because sometimes the most important research data is the kind that proves love works better than any treatment protocol ever could. As dawn broke over Last Hope Ranch, the Patterson family stood together on their front porch, watching federal vehicles arrive not to take Thunder away, but to arrest the woman who had orchestrated their suffering. Thunder sat beside Grace, his tail wagging slowly, finally free from the shadow of government seizure that had haunted his brief taste of family life. The nightmare was over, but the real story of healing, justice, and unconditional love was just beginning. 2 years later, the morning sun painted Last Hope Ranch in shades of gold and promise as Grace Patterson, now 10 years old, sat cross-legged in the pasture reading aloud to an audience that would have seemed impossible during those dark days when Thunder's future hung in the balance. Thunder, now 8 and bearing distinguished gray patches around his muzzle, lay contentedly beside her, while 3 other German shepherds, retired military dogs who had found their way to the ranch through Dr. Morrison's reformed placement program, listened with the patient attention of souls who understood the healing power of a child's voice. The ranch had transformed beyond recognition, though the changes felt organic rather than imposed. Where once financial desperation had threatened to tear the Patterson family apart, purposeful abundance now flourished. The Second Chance Sanctuary, as they'd renamed the property, housed 12 retired military dogs and provided residential therapy programs for veterans struggling with PTSD. Jake Patterson, once broken by invisible wounds, now served as the facility's director, his own journey from trauma to healing providing roadmap and inspiration for the men and women who arrived seeking their own second chances. Sarah Patterson emerged from the newly constructed therapy center, her medical degree finally complete after years of remote learning balanced with family responsibilities. Her specialization in trauma psychology had been inspired by watching Thunder's intuitive therapeutic methods, and her published research on human-animal bonding and PTSD treatment had become required reading in veterinary psychology programs across the country. She carried herself with the confidence of someone who had found her calling, no longer torn between competing dreams but instead living a life that seamlessly integrated all her passions. "Grace, honey, your interview with Channel 7 starts in 20 minutes, Sarah called across the pasture. "You might want to brush the hay out of your hair before you become famous again." Grace grinned, her face radiating the kind of joy that came from a childhood filled with purpose and unconditional love. At 10, she had already testified before Congress, written a best-selling children's book about Thunder, and become the youngest recipient of the American Veterinary Association's Humanitarian Award. But none of those accomplishments mattered as much to her as the simple daily routine of caring for the dogs who had found sanctuary at the ranch. "Thunder says we have 5 more minutes," Grace announced with the matter-of-fact authority of someone whose bond with animals transcended normal communication. "Rex is telling me about his nightmares again, and I think he needs to hear the end of this chapter." Sarah smiled, no longer surprised by her daughter's uncanny ability to sense the emotional needs of traumatized animals. Dr. Morrison, who had become both friend and research partner, theorized that Grace's early bonding with Thunder had developed neural pathways that enhanced her empathic abilities, Whether through science or intuition, Grace possessed a gift for helping both animals and humans process trauma through storytelling and patient presence. Hal Patterson, now 74, and officially the ranch's Chief Wisdom Officer, a title Grace had invented for him, approached across the pasture with the measured steps of someone whose body had aged but whose spirit remained vital. His daily routine included morning coffee with the dogs, afternoon sessions sharing war stories with visiting veterans, and evening consultations on ranch management decisions. The inheritance money he'd finally revealed had transformed from a guilty secret into the foundation for something beautiful, proving his longtime belief that the best investments were made with the heart rather than the head. "Buttercup," Hal said, using Grace's childhood nickname. "That reporter from Channel 7 is here early. She's mighty interested in hearing about Thunder's latest accomplishment." Grace's eyes sparkled with excitement as she carefully closed her book and gave each dog a gentle pat. Thunder's latest accomplishment was indeed remarkable. He had successfully trained 2 younger dogs in therapeutic response techniques, essentially becoming a mentor who could pass on his healing abilities to the next generation of therapy animals. The development had attracted attention from animal behaviorists worldwide, but for the Patterson family, it simply represented Thunder's continued evolution from broken soldier to healing teacher. The media attention had been both blessing and challenge over the past 2 years. Grace's story had captured national imagination, spawning documentaries, book deals, and speaking opportunities that kept the family's message of healing and hope in the public consciousness. But fame came with scrutiny, and the Pattersons had learned to balance their advocacy work with the private family time that remained sacred. Jake appeared from the direction of the therapy center, accompanied by Marcus Williams, a 25-year-old Marine veteran who had arrived at the ranch 6 months earlier in the grip of severe PTSD and addiction issues. The transformation in Marcus was visible. Where once haunted eyes and trembling hands had marked him as a broken soldier, he now moved with purpose and spoke with clarity about his journey toward healing. "Grace, Marcus wants to tell you something before your interview," Jake said, his own transformation evident in the calm confidence that had replaced years of anxiety and self-doubt. Marcus knelt beside Grace, his face serious with the kind of gratitude that words struggle to contain. "Grace, 6 months ago I came here planning to end my life. I couldn't sleep, couldn't eat, couldn't function. But watching you with Thunder, seeing how patient love can heal even the deepest wounds, it gave me hope that maybe I could heal too." Grace listened with the mature attention that had always distinguished her from other children, her green eyes reflecting understanding beyond her years. "Did Thunder help you too?" "Thunder and you both did," Marcus replied. "But mostly, you taught me that healing isn't about forgetting what happened. It's about finding people and animals who love you enough to help carry the weight until you're strong enough to carry it yourself." The Channel 7 news crew had set up their equipment near the ranch's main building, their presence adding an air of official importance to what had become a routine part of the Patterson family's mission. Reporter Janet Chen, no relation to Dr. Morrison's research partner, had covered Grace's story from the beginning, watching a frightened 8-year-old become a confident young advocate whose influence extended far beyond her Wyoming ranch. "Grace, you've become something of a celebrity in the animal therapy world," Janet said as cameras rolled. "What do you want people to understand about the work you're doing here?" Grace considered the question with characteristic thoughtfulness, one hand resting on Thunder's head as if drawing wisdom from their connection. "I want people to know that animals aren't just pets or tools. They're teachers who can show us how to love without conditions and how to forgive without keeping score. Thunder taught me that broken doesn't mean worthless. Sometimes the things that have been hurt the most have the biggest hearts." The interview continued for 30 minutes, covering the ranch's expansion plans, Grace's upcoming book tour, and the federal legislation known as Thunder's Law that had revolutionized military dog retirement and placement procedures. But the most powerful moment came when Janet asked about Dr. Victoria Blackwood, whose federal conviction and prison sentence had closed a dark chapter in military animal research. Dr. Blackwood thought she could study love like it was a science experiment, Grace said with wisdom that seemed impossible from someone so young. But love isn't something you can measure or control. It's something you give away and somehow end up with more than you started with. Thunder lifted his head at the mention of the woman who had orchestrated so much pain, but his expression showed no trace of the trauma that had once defined him. Time, love, and purpose had healed wounds that Dr. Blackwood's research had tried to perpetuate. The dog's calm confidence served as living proof that recovery was possible when the right conditions were provided. Dr. Morrison arrived as the interview concluded, her transformation over the past 2 years as dramatic as anyone's. She had left government service to establish the Morrison Institute for Ethical Animal Research, using her insider knowledge to reform practices that had harmed countless animals. Her friendship with the Patterson family had filled a hole in her heart that 15 years of grief had carved, proving that healing often came through helping others find their own path to wholeness. "Grace, I have news that might interest you," Dr. Morrison said, her eyes twinkling with barely contained excitement. "The Pentagon has approved funding for a new program based on Thunder's training methods. Military dogs will now receive therapeutic training alongside traditional combat preparation, ensuring they're better equipped to help their human partners process trauma." The announcement represented vindication for everything the Patterson family had endured and fought for. Thunder's story had evolved from personal healing to institutional change, proving that individual acts of love could ripple outward to transform systems and save lives on a massive scale. As the news crew packed their equipment and visitors returned to their own missions, the Patterson family gathered on the front porch for their evening ritual. Grace read aloud from her latest manuscript, a sequel to her best-selling book that explored the stories of other rescue dogs who had found their calling as healers. Thunder listened with the patient attention he'd shown since those first days in the barn, though now his audience included a dozen other dogs and several veterans who had found their own healing through the ranch's programs. The sun set over the Wyoming mountains, painting the sky in brilliant oranges and purples that seemed to celebrate another day of second chances fulfilled. Jake sat with his arm around Sarah, their marriage stronger than ever after surviving trials that would have destroyed lesser bonds. Hal rocked gently in his chair, surrounded by the legacy he'd always dreamed of leaving. Not just land and buildings, but a living testament to the power of love over fear, hope over despair. "Grandpa," Grace said as she closed her book for the evening, "do you think Thunder knows how many lives he's changed?" Hal looked down at the magnificent German shepherd, whose journey from traumatized veteran to healing teacher had transformed not just one family, but an entire approach to military animal care. Thunder's tail wagged slowly, as if he understood the conversation, his calm presence anchoring everyone in the peaceful certainty of home. "I think Thunder knows exactly what he's accomplished," Hal replied, his voice rich with the satisfaction of someone whose faith and love had been proved right. "But more importantly, I think he knows that this is just the beginning." As if to confirm his words, Thunder stood and made his evening rounds, checking on each family member with gentle attention before settling back beside Grace's chair. The routine spoke of security, belonging, and the kind of unconditional love that had saved them all. The memorial bench they'd installed near Sweetwater Creek bore a simple inscription, "For all the Thunders waiting for their grace, and all the graces waiting for their Thunder." Below it, fresh flowers marked the spot where a little girl had nearly drowned and a broken dog had found his courage. The creek ran clear and peaceful now, its waters reflecting stars that seemed to smile down on a ranch where miracles happened daily. In the distance, a train whistle echoed across the valley, but instead of carrying freight toward unknown destinations, it seemed to celebrate arrivals. New veterans finding hope, new dogs discovering purpose, new families learning that love multiplied when shared rather than hoarded. Grace fell asleep that night with Thunder beside her bed, just as she had every night for 2 years. But now their bond represented more than personal healing. It stood as proof that the most powerful force in the universe wasn't government authority or scientific research or financial pressure, but the simple decision to love without reservation and protect without question. Some heroes wore uniforms, some had 4 legs and wagging tails, and some were 10-year-old girls who understood that the greatest adventures began with opening your heart to someone who needed saving, even when that someone ended up saving you right back. Thunder's legacy lived on in every dog that learned to trust again, every veteran who found peace, and every family that discovered that home wasn't a place but a feeling created when broken souls chose to heal together. And in the heart of Wyoming, where Last Hope Ranch continued to work its daily miracles, love remained the strongest force of all. For those of us who've weathered life's storms and understand that true wealth isn't measured in bank accounts but in the bonds we cherish, Thunder and Grace's story reminds us of a profound truth we sometimes forget in our golden years. Remember when a handshake meant everything, when neighbors helped neighbors without expecting anything in return, and when love was simple, unconditional, and healing. That's the America Grace Patterson discovered at 10 years old with a broken German shepherd who taught her that the most damaged souls often possess the greatest capacity for love. In our fast-paced world where family dinners are interrupted by smartphones and grandchildren live states away, we hunger for the kind of connection that transcends words. The loyalty Thunder showed Grace, the wisdom Grandpa Hal shared through morning coffee conversations, the way Sarah balanced career dreams with family devotion. This isn't just a story about a girl and her dog. It's about rediscovering that our greatest legacy isn't what we leave behind, but how we love while we're here. What moments of unconditional love have shaped your life? Have you ever experienced the healing power of a loyal companion during your darkest hour? Share your stories below. Our community needs to hear how love conquered your storms too. The 8-year-old girl's scream pierced the Wyoming morning as the flash floodwaters of Sweetwater Creek seized her small body, dragging her toward the jagged rocks downstream. Harold Patterson dropped his coffee mug, watching it shatter against the porch steps as his granddaughter Grace disappeared beneath the churning brown water. The dangerous German shepherd everyone feared suddenly bolted from the barn. Thunder launched himself into the raging current without hesitation, his powerful frame cutting through waters that had already claimed 2 ranch hands this season. Sarah Patterson's nursing training kicked in as she sprinted from the house, calculating drowning times and survival odds while her father-in-law stood frozen in disbelief. Grace's blonde head surfaced briefly near the old oak, her tiny hands grasping desperately at nothing but foam and debris. The creek that had been their family's lifeline for 4 generations had become a liquid death trap in minutes. "Get the rope!" Hal shouted, his 72-year-old legs carrying him faster than they had in decades. Could the traumatized war dog save her? Or would Sweetwater Creek claim them both? Leave a like and share your thoughts in the comments along with the city you're watching from now. Let's continue with the story. 6 months earlier, Last Hope Ranch had been Harold Patterson's pride and the Patterson family's sanctuary for 4 generations. Sprawling across 1,200 acres of Wyoming's Sweetwater Valley, the ranch stood as a testament to American grit and determination. But now, weathered foreclosure notices fluttered against the kitchen window like death sentences, and the morning coffee tasted bitter with the knowledge that 72 hours remained before the bank claimed everything. Harold Hal Patterson adjusted his Korean War veteran cap and surveyed his domain from the wraparound porch his great-grandfather had built with his own hands. At 72, Hal carried himself with the ramrod posture of a man who'd never backed down from a fight, whether in the frozen hills of Korea or the unforgiving winters of Wyoming. His weathered hands, scarred from decades of ranch work, gripped the porch railing as he watched the sun rise over land that might soon belong to strangers. "Back in my day, a handshake was worth more than any contract," he muttered, thinking of the banker's cold eyes and legal documents. But times had changed, and handshakes couldn't stop foreclosure proceedings. Inside the ranch house, Sarah Patterson moved through her morning routine with the mechanical precision of someone running on 3 hours of sleep. At 38, she possessed the kind of tired beauty that came from caring for everyone but herself. Dark circles shadowed her green eyes as she packed her 8-year-old daughter's lunch, her mind already calculating the hours until her next double shift at Sweetwater General Hospital. The nursing scrubs hanging by the door served as a constant reminder of deferred dreams. Somewhere in her bedroom dresser, hidden beneath old nursing textbooks, lay an acceptance letter to medical school that no one knew about. Jake Patterson sat at the kitchen table, his hands wrapped around a coffee mug to stop their trembling. At 42, he carried the invisible wounds of 2 tours in Afghanistan like stones in his chest. The disability checks barely covered Grace's school supplies, let alone ranch expenses, and each month the weight of failure pressed heavier on his shoulders. His wife moved around him with practiced care, avoiding sudden movements that might trigger another episode. 8-year-old Grace Patterson possessed the kind of old soul wisdom that comes from listening to adult conversations through thin walls and understanding more than anyone realized. Her blonde braids caught the morning light as she colored at the kitchen table, creating elaborate drawings of horses and dogs, while her parents discussed finances in hushed, urgent tones. She'd learned to read when she was 4, but pretended otherwise so Grandpa Hal would continue their nightly story sessions, the highlight of both their days. The Patterson family had weathered drought, recession, and personal tragedy, but this financial storm threatened to wash away everything they'd built. What they didn't know was that their salvation would come not from banks or lawyers, but from an abandoned German shepherd with haunted eyes who would soon teach them that some bonds transcend ownership, and that sometimes the most broken souls possess the greatest capacity for heroism. The call came on a Tuesday morning when the September heat shimmered like liquid mercury across the Wyoming plains. Sheriff Tom Bradley's voice crackled through Hal's old rotary phone with the kind of weariness that came from delivering bad news too often. "Hal, we've got a situation down by Highway 287. Animal Control found a German shepherd, half-starved and meaner than a rattlesnake. They're talking euthanasia. But the dog's got military tags. Thought you might want to take a look before they put him down." Hal's weathered fingers drummed against the kitchen counter as he considered the implications. The ranch was already drowning in debt, and feeding another mouth seemed like madness. But something in the sheriff's tone suggested this wasn't just any dog. "Military tags, you say?" "Afghanistan veteran tags. Dog's been through hell, by the looks of him. Ribs showing, coat matted, and he won't let anyone within 10 feet without showing teeth." "But Hal, there's something in his eyes. Intelligence. Like he's waiting for something." An hour later, Hal stood outside the chain-link fence of the county animal shelter, studying the massive German shepherd huddled in the corner of a concrete kennel. The dog's black and tan coat was dull with neglect, his powerful frame reduced to sharp angles by starvation. When their eyes met, Hal felt a jolt of recognition, not of the animal but of the expression. He'd seen that same haunted look in Jake's eyes every morning for the past 3 years. "Thunder," Hal whispered, reading the name on the weathered collar. The dog's ears pricked forward at the sound, a glimmer of hope flickering in those dark depths. Grace fell in love before Thunder's paws touched ranch soil. While Jake helped unload the transport crate, muttering about liability and additional expenses, Grace pressed her small face against the truck window, studying the magnificent animal with the intensity of a scientist making a discovery. "He's beautiful, Grandpa," she breathed, her 8-year-old heart apparently immune to the warnings about aggressive behavior and bite risks. Sarah emerged from the house, still wearing her hospital scrubs from the night shift, her expression cycling through exhaustion, concern, and maternal protectiveness. "Hal, what were you thinking? We can barely afford to feed ourselves, and now you bring home a traumatized military dog?" The argument that followed echoed across the ranch with the kind of intensity that comes from desperation wearing thin. Jake paced the front porch like a caged animal, his PTSD heightened anxiety manifesting in rapid breathing and clenched fists. The sight of the German Shepherd triggered something deep in his subconscious, fragments of memories he'd buried so deep that even the VA therapists couldn't reach them. "Military dogs are weapons, Sarah," Jake snapped, his voice carrying the edge that appeared during his worst episodes. "They're trained to attack, to kill. This isn't some golden retriever from a rescue shelter." But Grace had already made her decision. While the adults argued, she approached Thunder's temporary pen with the fearless curiosity that only children possess. The dog watched her advance, his body tense but not aggressive. When she knelt beside the fence and extended her small hand, Thunder approached cautiously, his massive head lowering until his nose touched her fingers through the wire mesh. "See?" Grace announced triumphantly. "He's not mean, he's just scared." The moment stretched between child and animal, a connection forming that transcended species and spoken language. Thunder's tail gave the barest whisper of a wag, the first sign of hope anyone had witnessed from the traumatized animal. Hal watched the interaction with growing conviction. In his 72 years, he'd learned to trust his instincts about character, whether human or animal. Something about Thunder reminded him of soldiers he'd known in Korea, broken but not defeated, damaged but still capable of love. 30 days, he announced, cutting through the family debate with the authority of a ranch patriarch. "We give him 30 days. If he proves dangerous, he goes back. If not, we keep him." Sarah's protests died on her lips when she saw Grace's radiant smile. Jake continued pacing, but his arguments lost their fire. The decision had been made not through logic or financial planning, but through the kind of intuitive wisdom that had guided the Patterson family through 4 generations of challenges. That first night, Thunder refused to enter the barn or accept the makeshift bed Hal had prepared. Instead, he positioned himself beneath Grace's bedroom window, his alert ears tracking every sound in the darkness. When a coyote pack began their distant howling, Thunder's low growl served as both warning and promise. He would guard this place, these people, with whatever remained of his shattered spirit. The 30-day trial had begun, though none of them suspected that Thunder's presence would ultimately save more than just their ranch. Some rescues, as they would soon discover, work both ways.